I still remember the first time I saw her. It was at a small community dance class I'd signed up for on a whim. Honestly, I hadn't expected much, maybe a few clumsy steps, a good workout, and the chance to break the routine of my week. But when she walked in, everything around me seemed to shift a little. She carried herself with a kind of ease that made the room notice her without her even trying. Dark hair swept neatly behind her shoulders, eyes that hinted at both confidence and mischief, and a smile that looked like it had been practiced through years of both joy and restraint. She wasn't just beautiful, she was composed, the kind of presence that steadies you before you even realize you needed steadying. I got paired with her by pure chance. My palms were a little sweaty, something I hoped she wouldn't notice when we clasped hands. She tilted her head toward me, her lips curving into that quiet smile, and said, half jokingly, "Don't step on my toes." I laughed nervously, trying to play it cool. "I'll do my best," I said, though inside I wasn't so sure. The music started, and I tried to keep count, but the truth is, all I could focus on was the warmth of her hand resting in mine. Her touch wasn't forceful. It was steady, guiding. Every time I stumbled a little off rhythm, she adjusted with grace, as if making space for my mistakes without ever making me feel clumsy. I could feel the soft brush of her fingertips against my palm, the gentle pressure of her hand on my shoulder. Each small point of contact carried more weight than I expected. I don't think she meant for it to happen, but her nearness disarmed me. The faint trace of her perfume, something floral, subtle, not overpowering, lingered in the space between us. When she laughed at my misstep, the sound was so close to my ear it sent a strange little current through me. She was the teacher in that moment, even though neither of us officially wore that role. She straightened my arm, adjusted the way my feet moved in line with hers, and with each correction came another tiny moment of connection. Her fingers brushing my sleeve, her voice low and patient, her eyes meeting mine for just long enough to make me forget which direction I was supposed to turn. There was nothing dramatic about that first dance. No spotlight, no perfect sweep across the floor. But there was something more important, a spark of awareness. The kind that makes you realize you're suddenly very attuned to every movement, every glance, every breath shared in close proximity. And when the song ended, she let her hand linger a moment longer before stepping back. She looked at me, amused, as if deciding whether I'd passed her little test. "Not bad," she said softly, her smile deepening. In that instant, I knew, this wasn't just about learning steps. This was about stepping into something neither of us had expected. The second time we danced, something shifted. The nervous edge I carried that first night softened a little, replaced by a curiosity I couldn't quite hide. She stood across from me again, her posture graceful, her expression calm, like she belonged on that floor in a way I was still trying to. When the music began, I found myself less concerned with the steps and more aware of how she moved. Every tilt of her head, every quiet exhale, every way she let the rhythm guide her, it was as though the music lived in her body, and I was simply trying to catch up. Her hand slipped into mine, warm and sure. There was no hesitation in her touch, and somehow, that steadiness began to settle me. She pressed her other hand lightly against my shoulder, guiding me into position. The pressure was gentle, almost imperceptible, but enough to remind me she was there, anchoring me. I tried to match her rhythm, counting silently, 1, 2, 3, but I kept losing track whenever she laughed. Her laughter wasn't loud, it was light, almost like a secret shared only between us. It came easily when I misstepped, and instead of making me feel clumsy, it somehow drew me closer to her. "Relax," she said quietly, her voice low, almost blending into the music. "You're too focused on being right. Just feel it." So I tried. Instead of counting, I let myself follow her lead. The sway of her hips, the subtle pull of her hand, the way her eyes lifted to mine in brief, searching glances, it all became part of the rhythm I couldn't find on my own. There were moments when our movements synced so seamlessly I almost forgot this was practice. Her palm pressed against mine, her fingers curling ever so slightly, sending a strange comfort up through my chest. The closeness was new, but not unwelcome. And then, in a quiet pause between songs, she told me a little about herself. Not much, just fragments. That she came here to keep herself moving, that dancing had once been a part of her life she'd lost track of, and now she was reclaiming it. Her eyes softened as she spoke, like the memory carried both pride and sadness. I listened, holding on to every word, feeling the weight of her honesty. She wasn't just someone teaching me steps, she was letting me see a glimpse of who she was beneath the composure. When the next song began, I found myself leaning into the closeness, no longer worried about how I looked, but about how it felt to move with her. And it felt natural. As if, for a few minutes, we weren't strangers from different stages of life. We were simply two people finding the same rhythm. Her smile at the end told me I was getting better. But the truth? What mattered wasn't whether I learned the steps, it was that I was learning her. By the third week, something unspoken had already begun weaving itself between us. It wasn't in the steps, though I was finally stumbling less. It wasn't in the music, though I was learning to let the rhythm carry me. It was in the pauses, the quiet moments when neither of us had anything to say, yet everything seemed to be said anyway. That evening, after a string of songs, the instructor called for a short break. Most of the class drifted to the sides of the room, chatting or grabbing water, but she and I stayed where we were, still standing close in the center of the polished wooden floor. We sat down eventually, side by side, our shoulders almost touching. The room was filled with the faint shuffle of others moving about, but for us, it felt strangely quiet. She leaned back on her hands, breathing lightly from the practice, and a loose strand of hair slipped down across her cheek. I didn't think, I just moved. My hand rose slowly, brushing the strand back, the tips of my fingers grazing her skin for the briefest moment. It was nothing more than a soft touch, but the way she stilled told me she felt it just as much as I did. Her eyes lifted to mine, steady, unreadable at first. Then something flickered there, something both cautious and vulnerable. My breath caught in my chest, as though the simple act of looking at her had grown heavy with meaning. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence was charged, the kind that pulls you in rather than pushes you away. My hand lingered just a moment too long near her cheek before I drew it back, unsure if I had crossed an invisible line. She didn't move away, though. Instead, she smiled faintly, the kind of smile that seemed to both invite and warn in the same breath. I could almost hear the words she didn't say, careful. This is dangerous. The music from the next room started up again, faint, distant, but neither of us made an effort to stand right away. Her knee brushed against mine as she shifted, and that single point of contact felt more intimate than the entire hour of dancing before it. I realized then that what unsettled me most wasn't her age, or her experience, or even the difference in the worlds we came from. It was the way she made me feel seen. Truly seen. And I wondered if she was wrestling with the same thought, that this connection, small as it seemed, was already bigger than either of us had expected. When we finally rose to join the others again, her hand slipped into mine as naturally as before. But this time, I didn't feel like I was just learning a dance. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something we hadn't yet named. The shift was subtle at first. A glance held a little shorter than usual, a touch withdrawn just a beat too soon. I noticed it one evening during class, her laughter was still there, her guidance still patient, but something had changed in the way she carried herself around me. We moved through the steps as always, but her hand on my shoulder didn't linger the way it used to. When I fumbled, she corrected me, but quickly, almost briskly, as if guarding the space between us. For the first time I felt distance, not closeness. During a pause, I leaned toward her and whispered, "Are you okay?" She smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course. Just a little tired." Her voice was soft, careful, the kind of answer meant to deflect more than reveal. But later, when we sat out a song near the edge of the room, she let out a quiet sigh, as though holding something heavier than fatigue. She didn't look at me when she spoke. You know, she began slowly, whatever this is, it's complicated. The words tightened in my chest, though she hadn't said them unkindly. She was being honest. Her fingers twisted lightly at the hem of her sleeve, a nervous habit I hadn't seen before. People notice things, she continued, her gaze fixed on the dancers moving across the floor. They see us together, and they assume. And maybe they're not wrong. Her voice faltered just slightly before she caught herself. But I'm not sure I want to be the woman who, she stopped, shook her head. It doesn't matter. I wanted to reach for her hand, to tell her it did matter, that it mattered to me. But I hesitated, afraid of making the wrong move, of pushing her further away. Instead, I said gently, I don't care what people assume. She finally looked at me then, and in her eyes I saw the quiet battle she was fighting. Not against me, but within herself. You're younger, she said softly, almost reluctantly. You have so much ahead of you. I don't want to be a distraction. The word cut deeper than she probably intended. To me, she was the opposite of a distraction, she was focus, clarity, meaning. But I didn't say that. Not yet. I just nodded, letting the silence hold us for a moment. I could feel the absence of her hand in mine, as if the space between us had grown louder than the music playing. When the next song began, she stood, smoothing the front of her blouse, her composure returning like a shield. Come on, she said softly, offering me a small smile that felt more like a boundary than an invitation. I rose to join her, but inside I knew, we had stepped out of rhythm. And the question now was whether we would find our way back. I didn't let her distance become the ending. After class one evening, when most of the others had already left, I caught her by the door. She seemed ready to slip away quietly, but something in me wouldn't let the moment pass. Would you stay for a coffee? I asked, my voice low, careful. She hesitated, her hand tightening slightly around the strap of her bag. For a second, I thought she might say no. But then she gave a small nod, almost reluctant, as though curiosity outweighed caution. We found ourselves in a quiet cafe just down the street. The place smelled of roasted beans and fresh bread, the kind of comfort that made silence easier to bear. We sat by the window, the glow of the street lamps casting soft light across her face. For a while, we said little. The clink of cups, the hum of conversation from other tables, it filled the space between us. She held her coffee with both hands, staring into it as though it might give her answers she couldn't find in me. Finally, she spoke. You know I like spending time with you. Her voice was gentle, steady. But I can't ignore the way this looks. The way it feels. I'm not sure I should even allow it. Her honesty stung, but I knew it wasn't rejection, it was fear. Fear of judgment, fear of vulnerability, fear of what stepping closer might mean. I leaned forward, resting my elbows lightly on the table. I'm not asking for anyone else's approval. I'm asking for yours. If you want to step back, I'll respect it. But don't push me away because of what people might think. That's not fair to either of us. Her eyes lifted to mine then, searching, as if she was testing whether my sincerity could hold its ground. I didn't look away. She sighed softly, a sound filled with years of carrying expectations that weren't hers alone. You don't know what it's like, being my age, having lived through things, knowing how easily people judge. I'm not as free as you are. I shook my head. Maybe not. But what I see in you has nothing to do with age. I see someone who makes me better just by standing across from me on a dance floor. I see someone I don't want to lose because of silence. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, sad but touched. She wrapped her fingers around her cup, then set it down slowly, as though making a decision. When she finally reached across the table and let her hand rest on mine, the gesture was small, but it carried the weight of everything unsaid. Her touch was warm, steady, and for the first time in days, the rhythm between us felt balanced again. She whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe I've been too careful." And in that moment, I knew, we were both ready to step forward, even if only one small step at a time. It happened on a quiet evening, after class had ended and the rest of the group had already gone home. The lights in the studio were dimmed, the room hushed except for the faint creak of the wooden floorboards settling in the silence. I was gathering my things when she lingered near the mirrors, as though something kept her from leaving. I walked toward her, cautious but drawn in. "You're not in a hurry tonight?" I asked lightly. She turned, her expression soft, almost wistful. "Sometimes it's nice when the music stops. The quiet feels honest." Her words hung between us, simple but weighted. I set my bag down and stepped closer, close enough to notice the faint rise and fall of her breath. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, without speaking, I offered her my hand. She hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if questioning whether this was wise. But then she placed her hand in mine, the familiar warmth sparking a recognition I'd been missing. There was no music, no instructor counting out the rhythm. Just the two of us in the empty room, the hush of night pressing gently against the windows. I slid my arm around her waist, and she rested her hand lightly on my shoulder. Our bodies aligned as though the absence of sound made the movement easier, more natural. We swayed slowly, inventing our own rhythm. My bare feet pressed against the cool floor, her steps following with unhurried grace. Each shift of weight, each subtle turn, became less about precision and more about presence. Her head tilted slightly until it rested against my chest. I could feel the steadiness of her heartbeat, calm but undeniable, syncing with my own. My hand held her securely at the small of her back, not pulling, just steadying. In the silence, even the smallest gestures felt amplified, the warmth of her cheek against me, the soft brush of fabric where her arm brushed mine, the quiet trust in how she leaned without hesitation. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing her in. The faint trace of her perfume mingled with the wooden scent of the dance floor, grounding me. For the first time, it didn't feel like we were practicing, or even learning. It felt like we were simply, together. After a while, she lifted her head, her eyes meeting mine. There was no shield in her expression this time, only openness, and a question unspoken. I didn't answer with words. Instead, I tightened my hold just slightly, enough to let her know I wasn't letting go. Her lips curved into the smallest smile, tender and real. "We're terrible at following rules," she whispered, half amused, half resigned. "Maybe," I murmured, brushing my thumb lightly against her hand. "But we're pretty good at this." And so we kept moving, slowly, quietly, in a dance that belonged to no one else. No music, no steps, no judgment, just two hearts finally finding the same rhythm. When I think back to how it all began, it almost feels like a joke. "Don't step on my toes," she had said with that amused little smile, like she was daring me to prove I belonged there. At the time, I thought it was just a playful warning. I didn't realize it would become the first thread in something that would quietly, steadily change my life. Dancing with her was never just about learning steps. It was about learning presence, how to listen, how to move with someone instead of around them, how to be patient with the pauses. She taught me, without ever trying to, that connection isn't built in grand gestures. It's built in the brush of a hand, in the silence between songs, in the courage to sit across from each other with all the doubts and still stay. I know people might have their opinions. They might glance at us and see only what's different, our ages, our experiences, the places we've come from. But when I look at her, I don't see a divide. I see a bridge. She's lived enough to know the weight of hesitation, and I've lived just enough to remind her that hope is still worth holding. Somewhere in the middle, we found each other. And I'll admit, there were moments when I thought it might end before it truly began. The way she pulled back, the way fear flickered in her eyes whenever the world outside the dance floor crept too close. But those doubts only made the steps we took forward more meaningful. Because every time she let herself lean closer, every time she allowed her hand to linger in mine, I knew she was choosing me, not out of impulse, but out of quiet, deliberate trust. The night we danced without music stays with me. The silence was so complete, I could hear nothing but the sound of her breath and the beat of her heart against my chest. No rhythm, no instructions, just us, swaying to something only we could feel. It was in that moment I realized, this wasn't about stepping carefully anymore. It was about stepping fully, into her life and allowing her into mine. So when I tell this story now, I don't think of it as a tale about forbidden attraction or unlikely partners. I think of it as proof that sometimes the most important connections come quietly, disguised as chance encounters, built one hesitant step at a time. She told me once she was afraid of being a distraction in my life. What she never realized is that she's the opposite. She's the anchor, the rhythm, the steady ground I didn't know I was searching for. And if I had the chance to answer her again, I'd say this: I never cared about stepping on your toes. What I wanted, from the very beginning, was to step into your life.